Hi, I'm Tony Perez with Opco's Design, and I'm here to take you through session number 2 in this series about form-based codes. Today's session is about the regulating plan. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us today on on this session about the regulating plan. The um, the three-dimensional zoning map, as I like to call it. The uh, the regulating plan, it's best understood to talk about it in terms of scale first. You know, of how big of a form-based code and regulating plan can you apply? And this slide shows you the three different scales, general scales. The site-specific, usually a downtown or a small town main street or a particular neighborhood. Um, then the second one is multiple areas, might be several corridors or several neighborhoods. And then the third scale is all the walkable areas of an entire community. As we mentioned in the first part, a form-based code isn't applied to an entire community. It's only applied to the areas where walkable type of development uh, and proximity to uses and mixing of uses, mixing of housing choices is what is expected. So the hybrid um, puts together the zoning for form-based areas and the zoning that exists for conventional or use-based areas. Then the next step is to understand the types of regulating plans. So we talk about the scales, but the types of regulating plans are another thing. So for infill or preservation situations where there's an existing pattern, very strong existing physical character, then that type of regulating plan, which we'll talk about in the next segment here, that's what you need to use. Where there is an area with some development but a lot of vacant land or land that's going to be repurposed, then regeneration type of regulating plan is appropriate. When there's no pattern, in the case of greenfield, you know, there's nothing yet. It's a brand new community, brand new area. Then the greenfield regulating plan is the one to use. So let's talk about that one first. The greenfield regulating plan, as all regulating plans do, they identify the zones. In this particular case, they identify the approximate locations of new streets with the indication that more streets are going to be developed to fill out the network, but at the big scale, the important streets and the important connections are identified here, and then boundaries of natural areas not to be developed. The next aspect of a greenfield regulating plan is the civic and open space network, and it can be broken down into as much or as little detail as necessary. But this shows three different types of open spaces, all the way from actual nature to civic spaces inside the neighborhoods. And then the third level of third component of the greenfield regulating plan is the thoroughfare network. So as we mentioned in the first session in this series, there are lots of thoroughfares that are not just streets, roads, avenues, boulevards, um, passages, and all kinds of neighborhood streets. So this map would show all those and show the primary connections and then future connections you can see outlined there in gray. The second type of regulating plan is a regeneration regulating plan where, again, the idea is there's an existing pattern to build upon or to build within in gaps in existing areas, as is shown in this slide. And so the regulating plan completes the block and street network and identifies new zones for those new blocks. The second part of this regulating plan identifies the civic spaces within those new blocks or along those new blocks, and then new connections for pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles. And then the last portion of it, similar to the greenfield approach, is the thoroughfare component of the regulating plan. And this shows existing streets and new streets, or new streets to be retrofitted, where the Greenfield regulating plan is showing entirely new streets and new blocks and everything. The regeneration regulating plan is fitting into an existing system and building upon it, or making some changes to the existing system. The third type of regulating plan is the infill development type. And this one, all the blocks or exist. The lots exist. The buildings exist. There's a lot that it already is developed and contributes to the existing physical character and the way that the people enjoy the place. So the vision here is to usually when you work with a community, the vision is to work to identify what the intended changes are, or what is intended to be maintained and preserved. For example, there might be physical character on an existing street that is just wonderful, and people don't want any change. They want new investment, but they want that new investment to fit into that pattern. So change there means new investment fitting physically and sensitively into the existing pattern that people love so much. So this type of regulating plan tends to have more information in it as compared to the other two, because there's more to fit into. So to put them into scale, the Greenfield regulating plan is starting entirely from scratch. The regeneration regulating plan is recognizing that there's some existing characteristics there, and some are to remain, some are to be adjusted. And in the infill regulating plan, it's at the other end of the spectrum. It's usually recognizing much or all of the physical character that exists, and it's not changing it. It's actually making new development fit into that pattern. And so this type of regulating plan will tend to have more information and more detail in its code and its zone standards. And you could see here that the particular types of information that it contains. And as a detail on that, you can see that the urban design intentions of this particular vision are calling out special requirements at certain corners, certain passages through blocks in certain locations, and new civic spaces that are expected over the life of this plan, which is about 20 years. Other indications as well. For example, in certain areas of a zone says 4 stories are allowed in the zoning district. In certain areas, to be compatible with adjacent development, 3 stories are allowed. It drops at a story. Or there might be additional instructions about the length of buildings in certain areas, where maybe the zoning district allows the buildings to be, say, 100 feet long and 60 feet wide in particular areas in that same zoning district. Maybe this map shows an indication that says those buildings need to be only 60 feet long and 60 feet wide, so that they fit in with the buildings in that particular block. So instead of changing the entire zoning district, you can show in a map like this instructions like that refer to a portion of the code with particular standards. The other thing that's common through all of these is that in a regulating plan and a form-based code, the colors are indicative of intensity and in buildings and in uses. So whenever you see a regulating plan, the darkest color means the most intense uses, the broadest list of uses, and the most intense use of those lots. For example, buildings in the dark zone here are indicating that they use most of their lot. They tend to be attached. They tend to be toward the front or at the sidewalk, shaping usually a mixed use or Main Street type of environment. At the other end of the spectrum, in the pink zone, those buildings are detached. They're a lot smaller in footprint, tend to be 2 to 3 stories, have big front yards and big rear yards, and decent sized setbacks on the side. And then the uses are far less in those zones. They're still allowing mixed uses, but there are far less of them, or fewer of them, um, and in smaller sizes. And that's a particular aspect of regulating plans that the expectation is you can see the zoning map here, the regulating plan, and get a good picture and a good understanding without even looking at the code of the types of intensities and arrangements and uses that are allowed. The uh, the power of the regulating plan is that just like in the form-based code, you can choose as much or as little detail to put onto the regulating plan, but at its core, you want to identify the zoning districts, um, and then uh, any other particular standards. For example, you can see here this little black arrow shown in a couple new locations in this particular example of where at a certain project size, where a new street to break up that large super block would be required. So you can put all kinds of information on these regulating plans, and it really just depends on the vision that you're implementing, and that's key. You're always going back to the vision. This is again a big departure from conventional use-based approach, where it is more about preventing and limiting, which is certainly part of the equation, but the other part of the equation is what do you want to generate once you've identified what you want to prevent and what you want to limit? What do you want to generate? What do you want to make? So this tool helps you do that. That's all we have for today on the regulating plan. I really encourage your questions. I encourage you to look at these videos and study them, and I look forward to talking with you. Thank you.